create a levitation image by going from a photo like this to something like this. So welcome to this video tutorial on creating a levitation image in Photoshop. First thing that we need to do is obviously open up Photoshop. So if you search your apps, maybe this will be the first time some of you are opening up Photoshop. If it's not there, you'll have to download it from Adobe Creative Cloud. It takes a bit of time to load up. I recommend that you close other applications on your computer to free up some working memory. When you do open up Photoshop for the first time, you might get a screen something like this. For our purposes today, we're just going to go to New File, and we're going to create really basically any file. So you might find any of these custom ones. It really doesn't matter at this stage, because from here we're going to open up our levitation photos into a new tab anyway. So open up a new file, anything that you like, and you should find that your screen will look something like this. Maybe the first time that you open, it might look a little bit different, and we can troubleshoot the ways to set it up properly. But now that you've got Photoshop open, we need to get our images into Photoshop itself. Now, because we've taken a couple of images and we want to be editing them together, we're going to actually open them a special way. So we would normally, if we're just opening up one image or one file, you just go to File and Open. But because we've got a couple of images that we want to stack together and edit all in the one Photoshop project, we're going to go to File, down to Scripts, and over to Load Files into Stack. So that's File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. And now it's got choose two or more files that you want to open into your image stack. So this is where I'm going to click on Browse, and I'm going to find somewhere on my computer where I have already copied my photos from my SD card, and hopefully I've placed them somewhere that's easy for you to find. So here I've taken a series of images. I know from looking at these, reviewing them off my camera, I only need 1, 2, and 3 of them. For most levitation images, we're just doing 2, but I've got 3 just for a little bit of extra flavor. And so you can see they're now loaded here, and I'm going to click OK. And so see how that first file opened up in this tab over here. So in the top left, we can see that tab's open. We no longer need that, so I'm just going to close it. And here we are with our photos. Now we can only see one here. This is because Photoshop works with layers, a really important concept for Photoshop, where we can see our layers panel over here in the bottom right hand corner. Now, if you cannot see that, there could be a couple of things that's happening. The panel could be minimized, so you might find that the layers is down here. So if you click on that little tab, then it will pop up. And when you end up with more and more layers, you might want to drag it up so that we can see all of them. For now, we can see our little, our 3 layers here. Another thing, if you don't have that layers panel, it might be that the whole panel itself is closed. And so if the whole thing's closed, if I go up to Window, and then I'm going to find Layers, and click on that, and then here they appear again. So if you can't find it, Windows and then Layer, make sure that's ticked. Now, like I said, Photoshop works with layers, and understanding how layers work is a really fundamental concept in working with Photoshop. Essentially, here we've got our 3 layers, and I can click on each one, but it doesn't change what I see. Instead, next to the little icons or the little thumbnails of each image, I've got an eyeball. So if I want to see the image that's underneath this one, if I take off that eyeball, and then I can see the one that's underneath. And likewise, to see the bottom one, I need the top 2 eyeballs taken off, and now I can see that bottom one. If I have none, I'm just left with a blank slate. So just make sure that you are seeing the layers that you want to work with. But then when you're actually doing some work in Photoshop, you need to make sure that you have selected the layer. It's no longer important which one you can see, but rather which one you have selected. So as an example, if I've selected my top layer and I go and grab a paintbrush and I start to paint something, you can see that that appears straight onto that layer. I'll just do Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to get rid of that. But if I wanted to paint and my second layer has been selected instead, I can paint and it looks like nothing's happening. But that's because I'm painting on this layer here. Take off the eyeball from the top and you can see that's what I have painted. So just make sure that when you're working in Photoshop, you do have the correct layer selected and that it is visible in order to see your work. All right, so here we are with our 3 images, or you might have 2. And now something that I want to check. Now I've used a tripod in taking these photos and I can see that the background is perfectly lined up between them. Selecting those eyeballs on and off, you might find that in the process of taking your Levitation images, maybe the camera was bumped slightly and your backgrounds don't perfectly line up. You can see them sort of jitter and shift to the side. So the first thing that we're going to do is use some of Photoshop's AI to make sure that our backgrounds are lined up perfectly. So if I select my top layer here and hold down the Shift key and select the bottom layer, you can see it selected everything in between. If I'm clicking without holding Shift, I'm selecting only one at a time. So hold down Shift and select all of your layers. And now I'm going to go up to Edit and then come down to this option, Auto Align Layers. I'm going to click on Auto Align Layers and I'm going to use the auto projection. I don't need to create a collage or anything else. So auto projection, and I'll just hit OK. And what that will do is it will line up my background so that they're perfectly aligned now. So that's something you can do if yours weren't already perfectly lined up. All right, so now what we need to do to create this Levitation image is we've got to remove that chair. The way that we can do this is by working on our layers and using what we call masks. So what I'm going to do is, because I know my background in the other images is perfect, it's exactly what I want, I'm going to select my entire body here and then create a mask so that I can't see the background anymore. So there's a few ways in which you can select a mask in Photoshop. I find for something like this, using what's called the quick selection tool works best for my purposes, but there's certainly lots of other ways that you can select certain objects. You might find that when you come over to this right hand side to the tools bar, you might discover that a different tool is selected. You can right click on any of these and you'll actually find that more options will appear. So somewhere near the top, it'll either be appearing as the magic wand tool or the object selection tool or the quick selection tool. And so for this, we're going to use the quick selection tool. And now what I get with the quick selection tool, you can see I've got a little almost a band, you can't do this symbol on my cursor. What that means is no layers being selected for me to actually use the selection tool. So I'll come back over to my layers panel. I'll make sure that the top layer, the one that I want to work with, is selected, and now my cursor changes. I'm just going to punch in a little bit by hitting Control or Command and the plus symbol. That can zoom in, and the Control or Command and the minus symbol can zoom out. So I'm just going to zoom in so I've got a bit of a better look here, and just scroll around so I can make sure that I am selecting what I need to. We can see Photoshop's come a long way in the last few years, so we can give a try of the subject select tool. And I've just clicked that little button down here, and Photoshop's using its AI to work out what the subject is, and it's done a reasonable job. It's sort of selected most of me, apart from a little bit on my fingers. I can see that the marching ants aren't going around my fingers there. But one of the things that it has done wrong is it has also selected parts of this chair and also parts of the background up here. So this is why I've chosen the quick select tool, because the quick select tool actually gives us a few more options. You can see my my cursor here has a little plus sign in the middle. But if I come up to my tool options up the top, I can change this to a minus. Now that plus and the minus means we can add things to that selection, or the minus means we can take things away. So now if I start painting over the bits that I no longer want, you can see that it's slowly, slightly taking these things away. And then if I've taken that too much, so there's, if I punch in, you can see maybe my shoelace there is no longer selected. So I'll come back to the plus and I'll try to get that. And if I get a little bit too much here, it's not going to matter because my background doesn't change up here. The bit that I'm really focused on actually is the chair, because that's what I want to remove. So down here at the chair, I'm going to get a minus selection, and I'm going to paint over that chair as best as I can to take away some of that selection. And you can see my fingers have gone as well. So we'll go back to the plus. A little tip, if you hold down the Alt key, you can toggle between plus and minus, or add to the selection and take away from the selection. And you can see here, if I start painting over my finger, no, I'm getting more of the background now. So it can just be a little bit of trial and error, going from plus to add to the selection to taking away. All right, and let's have a look here. I want to take away a bit more of that chair up here, and I'll see, now this bit might prove to be difficult. As I get rid of this chair, will it be taking away some of my pants, considering they're a very similar tone? It's done reasonably well, but I can see that I've got, it'll end up with a bit of a flat bum, which I don't really want. So I'm going to try and add a bit more to that selection. And if I got a bit too much of the chair, that's okay at this stage. I'll show you how to rectify that soon enough. All right, am I happy? Do I have everything? I think so. I'm missing a bit of finger up the top here. So I'll just go up, and now I'm a bit worried that this brush might be a bit too big for that finger. So something that we can do is change the brush size. Up here in the tools, I can drag that slider up and down. Or if you're good with keyboard shortcuts, using the square brackets, the left square bracket will make our brush smaller, right square bracket will make it bigger. Those square brackets usually sit above your enter or return key on your keyboard there. So I'm just going to make sure that I haven't amputated my finger. There we go, and we should be good now. Okay, so here we are. We've got my body selected, and so we're up to the stage where we need to add a mask. The idea of a mask is that it blocks out everything else that isn't selected. To do that, we go over to our layers panel, and we come down to some of the options here, and it's this little button that has the rectangle with the circle in the middle, and we can see when we hover over it, it's got layer mask. A brilliant thing with Photoshop, the latest versions, they all have video tutorials about what tools do. So if you're unsure, you can hover over a different tool or option and then watch the quick video, and it will explain what Photoshop does with that tool. For us, I know that this creates a mask, and so if I click that, you can see now that the image underneath is starting to reveal itself. So what's actually happening here? Well, if we have a look over to what has happened to our little layer, we've got our thumbnail icon, and then we've got a new icon next to it. And hopefully you can see that that little icon has black and white, and that white bit is sort of in the shape of my floating body there. So what this mask tool does is it basically works like a stencil, where everything is that's black has been blocked out. We can't see it anymore. And everything that's white is visible to us on that layer. The reason why we do this, instead of going straight for our eraser tool and starting to rub out some of the background, is by using masks, we can actually come back later and change things. So for instance, if I have over here in my layers panel, if I come over and instead of selecting the actual image, select the mask, and then come over and grab just a regular everyday paintbrush, and I can go and I can change the hardness of this, so make the edges a little bit harder rather than soft edges. I can change the size as well. But if I've got that, and then I come over and I can choose between switching for white and black. And what that does, anything white, if I start to paint onto my stencil here, my mask, anything white, you can see I'm starting to bring back some of that chair. Opposite, if I get the black as my paintbrush and paint over anything that's white, I start to remove that. And you can see that that's starting to be reflected over here in my stencil. So if I raise my head here, okay, you can see here in the stencil it's also taken off. All right, it's still there in the image though. So that's really important, because if I make a mistake like that, all right, well then I just come back and I grab a white brush. So switch that, and then paint back over, and I can return things to the way that they were. So this is one of the reasons why we would use a mask rather than the eraser. And so here I have revealed a little bit of the background image here, or at least that second one. But I still want to be able to see that bottom image too. And I want to put them all together. So how do I do that? Well, if I take away that front image and I'm just working with the bottom two, now I can see that this one here where I'm over on the left is blocking this one where I'm over on the right. And I might just zoom out slightly, doing Control or Command on a Mac and minus to zoom out. And so what do I need to do? Well, I need to be able to reveal this side over here. Well, now that I know about layer masks, I can do that really easily. So let's make sure that not only can we see this second layer, but that it's the one that is selected. Because 9 times out of 10, when people are having problems with tools not actually working, the answer has to do with which layer is selected and which layer you can see. So here I've made sure that the top layer that I can see is the top layer that I've selected. I'm going to create another layer mask by going down to my little layer mask button, click on that, and then from here we can start to add a little bit of a mask. Now remember, if I didn't select anything this time, so my entire stencil is white because we can see everything in this image. But I want to reveal something that's over on this side. So with my layer mask selected, I'll go over and grab a paintbrush, and I'll make sure that my brush is black. And I can change the size of that if I like. So square bracket right to make that bigger. And if I start painting on, knowing that the thing that I want to reveal is over on this right hand side, if I start painting over on this right hand side, and as soon as I stop clicking, you'll be able to see over in that right layers panel that my stencil now appears where I have painted. So now I've got these two together, and if I click visibility on that top layer, you can now see that I've got all 3 selected. Now, I'll be pretty happy with that. It does look a little bit like levitating there, so that's worked reasonably well. There's a couple of things that I might like to adjust and try to fix here. And let's see if we can do that really quickly. First of all, I think this image is a little bit too dark. And with Photoshop, we can change things. We can brighten things up or darken them if we need to. And the way that we can do that is in our layers panel, we want to create a new, what we call adjustment layer. So down at the bottom here, next to our layer masks, we can go over and click on that little semi circle where if we click on it, we've got some options, and this is our adjustment layer. Now I want to adjust a bit of the brightness here. Now all four of these options will let you do that in different ways. I'm going to choose curves for us. So if I click on that, you can see right at the very top has appeared this adjustment layer, and similar to all the others, it does come with a little mask, but instead of an image itself, it's got an option. And so to make that visible, you can see it's just sort of appeared up here. I'm just going to pull that down. And the good thing about curves is we can make an image brighter by scaling back the lightest part of the image and pulling that back. So what that's saying is the lightest part, so this little histogram indicates where the colors are. So here, this little peak bit is saying there's a lot of really dark colors in here, and we can see that with my pants here, and there is a bit of dark. And over here, there is a little bit of pure white as well. I think that's probably coming from, I would imagine, the lights here and the background there. So there's a bit of pure white, there's a bit of really dark, but we want to try to make these darker tones just a little bit brighter. So we can drag the whole thing down, and that's telling Photoshop that what you originally thought was the middle brightness, we want to make that the brightest part of the image. But that kind of looks a little oversaturated, not quite great. It's actually the dark bits that we want to boost up. We want to keep the brightest parts as bright as they can be. So if we go to this line that's in the middle, and I'm going to click sort of over here where I've got some really dark bits, and that's the bit that I'm going to lift up. And if I lift that up, it makes my darks a bit brighter, but it's also adjusting the whole curve where the brightest bits are still too bright. So instead, I'm going to pull down that top bit to make sure that this curve is a little bit even. And we can find that in Photoshop, sometimes, or quite often, less is more. So if we want to balance those things out, we don't go dragging them all the way to the top and the bottom, but instead we just do slight adjustments. And now to see the effect that that has had, we can go down to our layers panel and click on that eyeball on and off. And so we can see by doing that, I've just made that image a little bit brighter, a little bit easier to see all elements of the image. And so that is essentially how we can create a levitation image. There are some more advanced techniques that we can do, but for this stage, we're happy with this experiment. We've made it look like there are 3 different people in the image, when really it was me 3 different times. Something that we might like to do is, now that I'm looking at this, face in the background is blocked out a little bit. So let's see if we can actually create a little bit of a change here. So if I have that layer selected, no, I don't have that option at the moment, so we're just going to leave that as it is, and I will instead export this image, because at the moment this is a Photoshop file. So I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file. I probably should have done that right at the start in case anything went wrong, but let's go save as, and this will save it as a Photoshop file, so a PSD file. Call it something useful, save it somewhere useful. You can see I already gave this a go this year, so I'll call this one Levitation B, and I'm going to save it in the folder where I will know where to find it. And it does take a little bit of time to save. We can see there's a little loading bar down the bottom, but a Photoshop file can't be visible by people who don't have Photoshop. So we need to export this as a JPEG. So I'm going to go to export, and I'll go export as, and we'll come up with this pop-up window, and they'll give us a few options. The format might be a PNG file by default. So if we go up to format, and we can change that to JPEG, and you can see now that I've making Photoshop really think. This is one of the reasons why closing other applications is a smart move in order to make Photoshop work a bit more smoothly. Quality, if I was printing this nice and big, I'll go all the way to a 7 high. But for us to put this in our visual diaries, it might just be a 6. Keeping the size as it was originally. So these were taken in with the good cameras, so they're quite big file sizes. We might not need 100%, but we might as well save it as 100% for now. And we'll just go down to export. And we can see we've got some options as to where to save it. Now, for me, I know that I want this saved in my Year 9 media folder. And so I'm going to save it here. I'll hit save. And so now I've got this file saved both as a Photoshop file that I can come back and edit more if I need to make more changes, but I've also exported it as a JPEG, which means I can put the JPEG into my digital visual diary. I can email it to a parent or a friend and share it more easily online. So there you go, creating a Levitation image in Photoshop. Give it a go, pause and rewind on this tutorial to follow any of those steps a little bit more clearly, and good luck making yourselves hover in the air. Thanks for watching.